Ancient Wisdom and the Heralding of the Christ Impulse by Rudolf Steiner. The meeting today is an occasion that demands an introduction to our studies. It is the day known in the Theosophical movement as White Lotus Day, commemorating the yearly anniversary of the day on which Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the founder of the present Theosophical movement, left the physical plane. It will need very little effort to touch a chord in every soul present here today in order to evoke feelings of admiration, veneration, and gratitude towards the individuality who came to the earth in Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, and inspired men to turn their minds again to the ancient, holy mysteries whence all the forces and impulses needed for man's spiritual development have proceeded. By devoting herself to what she clearly realized to be the task of the modern age, H.P. Blavatsky was able to present in a popular form what was accessible to her of the mystery wisdom, a form which differed from that in which mystery wisdom has, through secret channels, influenced men's activities and endeavors. The significance of the modern age lies in the fact that what was formerly accessible only to the few must be given in a form comprehensible to wider circles. And to have acted as she did at first, in accordance with this trend in the modern age, this was the mission of Madame Blavatsky. Thus she turned the minds of men to something which has, in truth, always been held sacred by those who had knowledge of it. Lovers of truth will always carefully distinguish in Madame Blavatsky's works what is essential and what is not. To her who is in our thoughts today, no greater service could be rendered than to look at her in the light of truth. No greater service could be done to her than to lead the Theosophical movement in the light of truth. Naturally, the Theosophical movement had at first to follow an individual course, but it has become a matter of great importance that another stream should flow into the movement. It has become necessary to add to the Theosophical movement the stream which since the 13th century has been flowing from occult sources, sources to which Madame Blavatsky had no access. So today we are doing full justice to the aims of the Theosophical movement, not only by recognizing the religious creeds and world conceptions of the East, but by adding to them that those that came to expression in the revelations of Sinai and in the mystery of Golgotha. And perhaps today it may be permissible to ask whether the scope of the Theosophical movement as a whole calls for the addition of what in the nature of things could not be given at the beginning, or whether specialization of an extremely questionable kind should by means of doctrine or dogma be given out as truth. I, for my part, say unreservedly that I know how great a wrong we should be doing to the spirit of H.P. Blavatsky, now in the spiritual world, if the latter course were taken. I know that it is not opposing but acting in harmony with that spirit if we do what it wants today, namely to add to the Theosophical movement what that spirit was unable to give while in the earthly body. And I know that not only am I not speaking against Madame Blavatsky, but in complete harmony with her when I say to you, the one thing I wish for is that our Western conception of the world shall come to its own in this Theosophical movement. In recent years, knowledge and truths of many different kinds have become available. Now let us assume that in 50 years' time everything would have to be corrected, that of our spiritual edifice, as we picture it today, not one stone is left upon another, that in 50 years' time occult investigation would have to rectify everything fundamentally. Then my comment would have to be this: Maybe, but one thing will remain of our aims here, and that it should remain is the object of the main endeavour of our Western Theosophical movement. It is that it may truly be said that there was once a Theosophical movement whose one ideal in the field of occultism was to establish only that which springs from the purest, utterly unsullied sense of truth. Our aim is that one day this may be said of us. Things still in doubt are better left unsaid than to deviate in any way from a course for which a pure sense of truth can take full responsibility before all the spiritual powers. From this, however, something else follows. Someone might feel called upon to ask, why do you reject this or that? Our answer is, although others may have a different idea of tolerance, our conception of it is that we feel obliged to protect mankind from what could not hold its own before the forum of pure truth. Although our work may be misrepresented, we shall stand firm and try to fulfill our task by rejecting whatever must be rejected if we are to serve our purpose. Therefore, when anything conflicts with our sense of truth, we reject it, but only then. We obey no other reasons or sentiments, nor will we indulge in trite phrases about equal rights of opinion, brotherhood, and so on, knowing that the love of men for one another can bear fruit only if it is sincere and true. It is fitting, particularly on this day of commemoration, that this will to be inspired by the purest sense of truth shall be expressed. Since new knowledge has been gained in the way I have indicated, much that can help to explain mysteries of the universe has come to light. Nothing is ever said to discriminate between the great cultures or religious movements of the human race. Has it not been said many times when considering the first post-Atlantean epoch with the spiritual culture inspired by the holy rishis, that there we have something that is spiritually more sublime than anything that has followed it? Neither should we ever think of belittling Buddhism. On the contrary, we emphasize its merits, knowing that it has given humanity benefits such as Christianity will be able to achieve only in the future. What is of immense importance, however, is that again and again we point to the difference that distinguishes Oriental culture from Western culture. Oriental culture speaks only of individualities who in the course of evolution have passed through several incarnations. For instance, it speaks of the bodhisattvas and describes them as individualities who pass through their human development more quickly than is usual. Thus, Oriental culture is concerned only with what, as individuality, passes from incarnation to incarnation until in a certain incarnation, such a bodhisattva becomes a Buddha. When a bodhisattva has become a Buddha, which he can only do on earth, he has advanced so far that he need not descend again into a body of flesh. And so the further back we go, the more do we find interest focused primarily on the individuality and less on the single incarnation. What is really in mind when speaking of the Buddha is not so much the historical Buddha, the Suddhodana prince, but rather a degree of attainment, a rank which other bodhisattvas also attain in the course of their successive lives. In the West, however, it is different. We have lived through an epoch of culture which has nothing to say about the individuality who passes from life to life, but values only the single personality. We speak of Socrates, Plato, Caesar, Goethe, Spinoza, Raphael, Michelangelo, and think of them only in the one incarnation. We do not speak of the individuality who goes from incarnation to incarnation, but we speak of the personality. We speak of one Socrates, one Plato, one Goethe, and so on. We speak only of a single life in which the individuality has found expression. Western culture was destined to stress the importance of the single personality, to bring it to vigorous, characteristic maturity, and to disregard the individuality passing from life to life. But the time has come when we must again learn gradually to recognize how the eternal individuality passes through the several single personalities. Now we find that mankind is striving to apprehend what it is that lives on from personality to personality. That will fire the imagination and illumine the souls of men with a new light of understanding. This can be illustrated by a particular example. We turn our eyes to a figure such as the prophet Elijah. First of all, we think of the prophet himself. But the essential significance of this prophet is the fact that in a certain way he prepared for the mystery of Golgotha. He indicated that the Yahweh impulse is something that can be understood and grasped only in the ego. He was not able to reveal the full significance of the human I, for as regards ego consciousness, he represents a halfway stage between the Moses idea of Jehovah and the Christian Christ idea. Thus the prophet Elijah is revealed to us as a mighty herald, an advanced messenger of the Christ impulse, of what came to pass through the mystery of Golgotha. We see him as a great and mighty figure. Now let us turn to another. The West is accustomed to think of him as a single personality. I refer to John the Baptist. The West sees him confined within his personality, but we ourselves learn to know him as the herald of Christ himself. We follow his life as the forerunner of Christ, as the man who first uttered the words, "Change the disposition of your souls, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." He indicated the impulse that was to come through Golgotha, that divinity can be found within the human ego, that the Christ ego is to enter more and more deeply into the human ego, and that this impulse is near at hand. Now, through spiritual science, we learn the truth that is also indicated in the Bible, namely that the same individuality who had lived in the prophet Elijah lived in John the Baptist. He who, as Elijah, heralded the Christ, was reincarnated as John the Baptist, again heralding the Christ in the way appropriate for his time. For us, these two figures are now united. Eastern culture proceeds in a different way, concentrating on individualities and neglecting the single personality. Passing on now to the Middle Ages, we find that extraordinary figure who was born, as if to give an outward indication of his special connection with the spiritual world, on Good Friday in the year 1483, and died in early manhood at the age of 37, a phenomenal influence through his gifts to humanity. I am speaking of Raphael. He was born on a Good Friday as if to show that he is connected with the event commemorated on Good Friday. What, in the light of spiritual science, can the West experience through the figure of Raphael? If we study this figure in the light of spiritual science, we shall discover that Raphael accomplished more for the spreading of Christianity, for the penetration of an interconfessional Christianity into the hearts of men, than all the theological interpreters, than all the cardinals and popes of his time. Before the eyes of Raphael's soul, there may have risen a picture of the scene described in the Acts of the Apostles. One stands up before the Athenians and says, "Ye men of Athens, worship the gods ignorantly with external signs. But there is that God whom one can learn to know, the God who lives and weaves in everything that has life. That God is the Christ who suffered death and has arisen, thereby giving man the impulse leading to resurrection." Some did not listen, others thought it strange. In Raphael's soul, this event came to expression in the painting now hanging in the Vatican, incorrectly named the School of Athens. In reality, it depicts the figure of Paul teaching the Athenians the fundamental principles of Christianity. In this picture, Raphael has given something that seems like a heralding of the Christianity that transcends denominations. The profound meaning of this picture has not yet dawned upon men. Of the other pictures of Raphael, it must be said that whereas nothing has remained of what cardinals and popes did for humanity at that time, Raphael's work is only today becoming a vital force. How little Raphael was understood in recent times is shown by the fact that Goethe, when visiting Dresden, did not admire the Sistine Madonna, having heard from the official at the museum, and he was only expressing the general opinion of the day, that there was something commonplace about the facial expression of the child Jesus, that the two angels at the bottom of the picture could only have been added by some dauber, that the Madonna herself could not be the work of Raphael, but must have been painted over. If we look through the whole of 18th century literature, we shall find hardly anything about Raphael. Even Voltaire does not mention him. And today, whether Protestants or Catholics or anything else, people are inwardly moved by Raphael's pictures. It can be seen how in the Sistine Madonna a great cosmic mystery reveals itself to human hearts and will carry its impulses through them into the future, when mankind will have been led to an interconfessional, broad and all-embracing Christianity, as we already have it in spiritual science. And that impulse will continue to work as a result of the fact that a wonderful mystery has inspired human souls through the Sistine Madonna. I have often said that when someone looks into a child's eyes, he can know that what is gazing out of those eyes is something that has not come into existence through birth, something that reveals the depths of the human soul. One who studies the children in Raphael's Madonna pictures can see that divinity itself, an occult and superhuman reality, looks out of those eyes, something that is still present in the child in the earliest period after birth. This can be perceived in all Raphael's paintings of children, with one exception. The portrayal of one child is different. It is that of the Jesus child in the Sistine Madonna painting. Whoever looks into the eyes of that child knows that they already reveal more than can be embodied in a human being. Raphael has made this distinction to show that in this one child, the child of the Sistine Madonna, there lives something that is already experiencing, in advance, a reality of pure spirit, a Christ-like reality. Thus Raphael is a harbinger of the spiritual Christ, who is revealed again by spiritual science. Through spiritual science, too, we learn that in Raphael there lived the same individuality who had lived in Elijah and in John the Baptist. And we can understand that the world in which he lived as John the Baptist reappears in Raphael when we observe how his relation to the historic Christ event is indicated by the fact that he was born on a Good Friday. Here then we have the third harbinger after Elijah and John the Baptist. Now we understand many of the questions inevitably raised by those possessed of wider powers of perception. John the Baptist dies the death of a martyr before the event of Golgotha is drawing near. He lives through the dawn leading to the mystery of Golgotha, through the time of prophecies and predictions, through the days of rejoicing, but not through the period of lamentation and sorrow. When this same mood becomes manifest again in the personality of Raphael, do we not find it comprehensible that with such deep devotion he paints pictures of the Madonna and of children, and is it not obvious why he does not paint the betrayal by Judas, the bearing of the cross, Golgotha, the Mount of Olives? Any existing pictures of these subjects must have been commissioned, for the essential being of Raphael finds no expression in them. Why are such pictures alien to Raphael? Because as John the Baptist he did not live to experience the mystery of Golgotha. And then, as we think of the figure of Raphael, how he has lived through the centuries and is still living today, and then think of what remains of his work and what has already been destroyed, and when we reflect that all material things must eventually perish, then we know well that the living essence of these pictures will have been taken into the souls of men before the pictures themselves have perished. For centuries yet, reproductions will of course be available, but that which alone can give a true idea of Raphael's personality, of what he was, what his own hands accomplished, that will crumble into dust. His works will have perished, and nothing on our earth can preserve them. But through spiritual science it is clear to us that the individuality in Raphael bears with it what has been achieved in one incarnation into the next. And when we learn that this same individuality appears again in the poet Novalis, and we take his first proclamation which, like a radiant sunrise, reveals a new and living concept of Christ, then we say to ourselves that long before Raphael's works disappear from the outer world, the individuality in that personality has come again, in order to bequeath his gifts in a new form to mankind. How good it is that for a time Western culture has paid attention only to the actual personality, that we have learnt to love a personality simply from the fruits of a single life. And how immeasurably enriched must our souls feel when we learn that the eternal part of man passes from personality to personality. And however different these personalities may seem to us to be, the concrete facts which spiritual knowledge can tell us about reincarnation and karma will somehow bring us understanding. Humanity will not profit as greatly from general concepts and doctrines as from details that can throw light upon individual cases. Then much that is attainable only through intuitive vision and occult investigation can be brought to bear on these matters, and at last we are able to turn our gaze to the mystery of Golgotha itself and remind ourselves that in the 30th year of the life of Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ being entered into him and lived through the mystery of Golgotha. When it is maintained nowadays that the Christ being cannot incarnate in a physical body, it must be said that that has really never been asserted. For the physical body into which the spiritual Christ being entered at that time was the sheath of Jesus of Nazareth. In that case it was not as it is with other individualities who build up their body themselves, but the Christ being descended into the body which had been prepared by Jesus of Nazareth only at a later point of time. True, there was then union, but we cannot really speak of a physical incarnation of Christ. These matters are self-evident to one who has knowledge. But now we know that through this Christ impulse, as it streams into the different civilizations of mankind, something has come to the earth, has flowed into humanity for the benefit of all mankind. Thus that which went through death is like a seed of corn, which multiplies, can make its way into individual human souls and spring to life. As we know that the body of Jesus of Nazareth had received the Christ being who, by passing through death, united himself with the earth, let us now ask, what will be the outcome of this when the earth has reached its goal and comes to its end? Christ, who united himself with the earth, will be the one reality on earth when it has reached its goal. Christ will be the spirit of the earth. This, in fact, he is already, only then the souls of men will be permeated by him, and men will form a totality together with him. And now another question arises. We have learnt that man in his form on earth is to be regarded as Maya. The form disintegrates after death. What appears outwardly as the human body is an illusion. The external form of the physical body will no more remain than the physical bodies of the plants, animals, and minerals will remain. Physical bodies will become cosmic dust. What is now the visible physical earth will have completely vanished, will exist no longer. And what of the etheric bodies? They have meaning and purpose only as long as they have to renew the life of physical bodies, and they too will cease to exist. When the earth has reached its goal, what will remain of all that man beholds? Nothing at all will be there, nothing of himself, nothing of the beings of the other kingdoms of nature. When the spiritual is set free, nothing will be left of matter but formless dust, for the spirit alone is real. But something will then have become a reality, something that in times gone by had not been reunited with the earth at all, and with which human souls will now unite, namely the Christ Spirit. The Christ Spirit will be the one and only reality that can remain of the earth. But how does this Christ Spirit acquire his spiritual sheaths? In the mystery of Golgotha, he descended into the sphere of earth as an impulse, as the soul of the earth. It does not happen in the same way as in human beings, but the Christ being too must form for himself something that can be called his sheaths. Christ will eventually have a kind of spiritualized physical body, a kind of etheric body, and a kind of astral body. Of what will these bodies consist? These are questions which for the time being can only be hinted at. When the Christ being descended to the earth, he had to provide himself with something similar to the sheaths of a human being, a physical body, an etheric body, and an astral body. Gradually, in the course of the epochs, something that corresponds to an astral, an etheric, and a physical body formed around the originally purely spiritual Christ impulse which descended at the baptism by John. All these sheaths are formed from forces which have to be developed by humanity on earth. What kind of forces are they? The forces of external science cannot produce a body for Christ, because they are concerned only with things that will have disappeared in the future, that will no longer exist. But there is something that precedes knowledge and is infinitely more valuable for the soul than knowledge itself. It is what the Greek philosophers regarded as the beginning of all philosophy, wonder or astonishment. Once we have the knowledge, the experience which is of value to the soul has really already passed. People in whom the great revelations and truths of the spiritual world can evoke wonder, nourish this feeling of wonder. And in the course of time, this creates a force which has a power of attraction for the Christ impulse, which attracts the Christ spirit. The Christ impulse unites with the individual human soul when the soul can feel wonder for the mysteries of the world. Christ draws his astral body in earthly evolution from all those feelings which have lived in single human souls as wonder. The second quality that must be developed by human souls to attract the Christ impulse is a power of compassion. Whenever the soul is moved to share in the suffering or joy of others, this is a force which attracts the Christ impulse. Christ unites himself with the human soul through compassion and love. Compassion and love are the forces from which Christ forms his etheric body until the end of earthly evolution. With regard to compassion and love, one could, to put it crudely, speak of a program which spiritual science must carry out in the future. In this connection, materialism has evolved a pernicious science, such as has never previously existed on earth. The very worst offence committed today is to correlate love and sexuality. This is the worst possible expression of materialism, the most devilish symptom of our time. Sexuality and love have nothing whatever to do with each other. Sexuality is something quite different from and has no connection at all with pure original love. Science has brought things to a shameful point by means of an extensive literature devoted to connecting these two things which are simply not connected. A third force which flows into the human soul as if from a higher world, to which man submits, to which he attributes a higher significance than that of his own individual moral instincts, is conscience. With man's conscience, Christ is most intimately united. From the impulses which spring from the conscience of individual human souls, Christ draws his physical body. The reality of an utterance in the Bible becomes very clear when we know that the etheric body of Christ is formed from men's feelings of compassion and love. What ye have done unto one of the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. For to the end of the earth's evolution, Christ forms his etheric body out of men's compassion and love. As he forms his astral body out of wonder and astonishment, his physical body out of conscience, so does he form his etheric body out of men's feelings of compassion and love. Why do we speak of these things at the present time? Because one day a great problem will have to be solved for humanity, namely how to present the figure of Christ in its relation to the various domains of life. This will be possible only if account is taken of many things that spiritual science has to say. When, after long contemplation of the spiritual scientific idea of Christ, an attempt is made to represent the Christ, one will experience a figure whose countenance contains the secrets with which all art can concern itself, indeed secrets which all art will and must make great efforts to comprehend. The countenance will give expression to the victory of the forces that are contained only in the face over all other forces in the human form. When men are able to fashion eyes that radiate only compassion, a mouth not adapted for eating but only for uttering those words of truth which are the words of conscience, when a brow can be shaped whose beauty lies in the moulding of the arch spanning the position of what we call the lotus flower between the eyes, when it becomes possible to accomplish all this, it will be understood why the prophet says, "He hath no form nor comeliness." Isaiah 53, verse 2. What is meant is that it is not beauty that counts, but the power that will gain the victory over decay, the figure of Christ in which all is compassion, all love, all devotion to conscience. And so spiritual science passes over as a seed into human feeling, human perception. The teachings that spiritual investigation can impart do not remain mere teachings. They are transformed into life itself in the human soul. And the fruits of spiritual science will gradually mature into conditions of life which will appear like an external embodiment of spiritual knowledge itself, of the soul of future humanity. With thoughts such as these, I would like to have spoken to you in the way that one likes to speak to those who are striving for spiritual knowledge, not in dry words, but in words conveying ideas and stimulating feelings which can live and be effective in the outer world. When such feelings are alive in men's hearts, they will become a source of warmth streaming into all mankind. And those who believe this will also believe in the effectiveness of their own good feelings. They will also believe that this can apply to every soul, even though karma may not enable it to be outwardly manifest. Invisible effects can thus be engendered whereby all that ought to come into the world through spiritual science can actually be brought here. That is the feeling I should like to have awakened in you on the occasion of my present visit to Cologne. These are the words of Rudolf Steiner. This lecture is entitled Ancient Wisdom and the Heralding of the Christ Impulse, and it was given in Cologne, the 8th of May, 1912.